Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Colin Scott is a heavy equipment operator. He's worked on the Sea to Sky project we're all familiar with, on the Port Mann Bridge, on Site C, on the new water main project in Victoria, on the water main project in Vancouver, and is currently working on the expansion at Vancouver Airport. He's very good at what he does. He's proud of what he does. On March 19th of 2016, the Premier spoke at the convention of one of his favoured unions, one of the few, Local 115 of the operating engineers. He told them that his plans for government infrastructure did not include people like Colin. He boasted, quote, "We're going to do it with union labour. You don't do it by going with the turkeys at Clack. That's not how I roll. That's not how we roll." End of quote. Colin Scott is a member of Clack, and Colin Scott is here with nearly 100 people who take the same view. They're good at what they do. They're proud of what they do. They are citizens of British Columbia in the fullest sense of the word. And this Premier decided to degrade and demean them in his comments. Does the Premier stand by his insulting comments directed at Colin Scott and his colleagues? And is he prepared to withdraw those demeaning and insulting words?
Premier.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. Thank you, Honourable Speaker, and I thank the member for his question. He will know that we are in one of the hottest construction markets the province has ever seen. We have the lowest unemployment rate in the country. I'm delighted to hear that Mr. Scott is working not on one but two projects at the present time. That speaks to the challenge we have in British Columbia at this point. That's why we're trying to build more capacity. That's why we're trying to build more capacity in British Columbia. Of the hundreds of projects being built in British Columbia right now, publicly funded projects, there are 3 community benefit agreements. And those agreements have just got underway. We're optimistic and confident that will lead to more apprenticeship completions than the past, and we're going to maintain that project going forward. But I say to Mr. Scott, and I say to the others who are here in the gallery today,
Members.
I say to those in the gallery here today that we value their work that has built British Columbia, as all construction workers across the province. The CBA projects, which are not new to New Democrats, as I said yesterday, the member might have missed it. WAC Bennett had project labour agreements. The former government had project labour agreements. So to say today to build a partisan approach to construction in British Columbia is offensive in my mind. We're going to build British Columbia the best we can. Great job for local residents.
Leader of the Official Opposition on a supplemental.
It's intrinsic to what we do in this room that we represent 87 different ridings in this province, representing 5 million British Columbians. That's our job. Once you're in government, your job is to work for the benefit of everyone in this province, because we all need to feel like we belong here. This is our home. We are citizens here. And yet this Premier has decided to exclude 85% of the qualified construction workforce from government projects. We hear his backbenchers mocking this. It's not funny if you're sitting in the gallery feeling like a second-class citizen. The Premier seems to think it's just fine to discriminate against highly qualified construction workers and to go to the extent of calling them the turkeys at Clack.
Members.
Colin Scott has this to say, quote, "The Premier has banned me from working on public projects under the NDP and written me and my colleagues off as turkeys. Why am I being treated like a second-class citizen?" Unquote. In a nation, a province, and particularly with a party that prides itself on egalitarian behaviour, how on earth can the Premier stand in this gallery today and face these people and say you're second class?
Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And again, I would have thought the learned colleague on the opposite side wouldn't need a history lesson. But project labor, and the House Leader as well, who's quick to quip, project labor agreements have been...
Members, the Premier has the floor. Premier.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. Project labor agreements have been in place in British Columbia for decades under successive governments, social credit, New Democrat. Yes, even BC Liberals built projects with community benefit agreements. Now, I appreciate that they want a grandstand for those in the galleries today. But the facts of the matter are this, Honourable Speaker. We have the hottest construction market we have ever seen in BC history. And of the hundreds of projects, the member on the opposite side articulated some of the publicly funded projects that CLAC members are working on, continue to work on. There are 3 projects in British Columbia that are using community benefit agreements because we want to kickstart apprenticeship training in British Columbia, and we're sticking with that, Honourable Speaker.
Member North Vancouver Seymour.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Premier, you are totally wrong. It is simply wrong to claim legacy agreements on projects that are awarded through an open tender, such as the John Hart, are in anywhere comparable to this discrimination that you are providing here to the construction industry in British Columbia. Carmen Ellerbach is an electrical apprentice from North Vancouver, and she's in the gallery today. And Carmen says, and I quote, "I want to know why the Premier is discriminating against me just because I'm not part of an NDP-approved union," end quote. Can the Premier explain to Carmen, who is listening in the gallery along with hundreds of other construction workers, why he is discriminating against her and treating her as a second-class citizen?
Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I just want to explain to the member opposite that all our procurement is done through open tender. It's all done through open tender. So just to clarify that for the member who clearly doesn't quite understand the procurement process. I'd also like to underline...
Members, we're not being fair to the people in the gallery, particularly people who are here, to get answers on this particular topic. If the visitors in the gallery will want to hear what the Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure has to say. Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as the Premier has mentioned, it's a hot construction market, but we are using community benefit agreements, as we have said in the past, as I said yesterday, to build not just British Columbia, but as generations have done before, build the people of British Columbia, allow for people who don't usually get the opportunity to work on construction projects to do so. And I'm really pleased that Carmen has been working on construction projects around the province. This is great because at the moment, only about 4% of the workforce are women. So it's terrific that Carmen has got out there and done that. And to the member, just to let her know that since we are prioritising both local hire, Indigenous hire and women training, that on our first CBA job site, she'll be very pleased to know, the workforce is 22% women.
Member North Vancouver Seymour on a supplemental.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And once again, the minister is wrong. It is on the BC Infrastructure Benefits website. It actually says, and I'm quoting, "You are required to apply for membership with one of the affiliated unions within 30 days.
Members.
It is simply not comparable. 85% of BC construction workers are not part of the 19 unions that the NDP is forcing workers to join. Taylor Pennanen is a second-year electrical apprentice from Maple Ridge. And he says, and I quote, "This policy is a fake that has nothing to do with helping workers, and why should I be forced to pay higher union dues and join a union I don't want to join," unquote. So my question again is to the Premier. Why are Taylor and the other hardworking British Columbians who are all here today being forced to join a union they don't want to?
Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, community benefits agreements, as the Premier has said, are at present being used in 3 publicly funded projects. Our Trans-Canada projects, Pattullo Bridge and Broadway. And we're very, very proud to be using them there, Mr. Speaker, because we are building up the province of BC. We have many other projects around the province where we're not using them. It's, as we've said before, on a really on a case-by-case basis. At the moment, we're dealing with these 3. And like in many areas, if it is a unionised job site, people are expected to join the union, as they were when they were working at the Waneta Dam, when they were working at John Hart, when they were working at many of the projects, both under the BC Liberals, under the Socreds, throughout that. And Mr. Speaker, we're committed to training. We know there's a skills shortage. The opposition seem to ignore that fact when they're in government. We want to deal with that. And we know that building trades has the best completion record for any apprenticeship, Mr. Speaker.
Member Saanich North and the Islands.
I'm overwhelmed every time I hear that clapping. Mr. Speaker, almost 30 of British Columbia's 52 surviving caribou herds risk extirpation. A dozen of the herds have fewer than 25 animals. 2 herds in the Kootenay region were declared locally extinct earlier this year. We know why. Caribou are highly sensitive to disruptions to their natural environment. Disruptions such as clear-cutting forests, seismic exploration, road building, oil and gas development, and land clearing. These are the conditions that allow wolves to thrive. Hunting in families, Stakaya is a proficient predator with highly developed relationships and an exceptional capacity to work together. The vegetation that once offered protection for the caribou and their food. With rapid changes to the land base, the caribou have been exposed. Exploration corridors, trails, and roads serve as predator highways, and caribou have had little time to evolve new food sources, skills, or tactics to protect themselves. The provincial response has been in part to shoot wolves from helicopters as a predator management strategy. My question is to the Minister of Forest, Lands and Natural Resources and Rural Development. Is the government planning to increase the wolf cull?
Minister of Forests, Lands, Natural Resources and Rural Development.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker, and thank you to the member for the question. We as a government take caribou recovery in BC very seriously, and that's why we rely on a range of approaches, Honourable Speaker, in supporting these populations. When it comes to making decisions about wolf management in BC, for instance, we rely on expert research and the science. The research shows that wolves are the principal predator of caribou in BC, and in fact, in May of 2018, the federal government, under the Species at Risk Act, said the caribou populations in BC were under imminent threat, not due to habitat loss, but due to predators. So predator control is one of the tools we use, and especially when herds are reduced in numbers to critical levels. But we also use other methods such as habitat protection, habitat restoration, maternity pinning, and supplemental feeding. And this, Honourable Speaker, is because caribou are an iconic species to BC and Canada, and we're taking measures to stabilize their populations and grow their numbers.
Saanich North and the Islands on a supplemental.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Minister for the response. The real issue here is actually habitat destruction, and it's on track to get worse. This government continues the massive taxpayer-funded subsidies of foreign corporations to expand LNG and thus increase fracking and caribou habitat. We know culling wolves to reduce the pressures on caribou is just a Band-Aid solution to a human-made problem. If this government doesn't fundamentally change the way they manage the landscape, then frankly, Mr. Speaker, we'll have to continue killing stakaya until they are no more. This government's reluctant to specifically protect species at risk because they are showing no restraint. Apparently, this government is okay with the short-term status quo approach to managing the decline to zero on a long enough trajectory that no one will notice. My question again is to the Minister. Is he comfortable knowingly committing a species to extinction by shying away from the responsible ecosystem habitat that we need while spending millions of dollars to shoot hundreds of wolves so this government can continue unsustainable logging practices and to increase fracking?
Minister of Forests, Lands, Natural Resources and Rural Development.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. Well, I agree with the member in that we've had to take drastic emergency measures to protect the populations of caribou that are left in this province, and that's because the inadequate patchwork of actions taken by the previous government that led to the threat of an imminent order, stop work order under the Species at Risk Act around habitat protection. So we're determined to take this on, Honourable Speaker. We know land use decisions impact caribou habitat and populations. We've provided $47 million for our caribou recovery strategy that involves a whole suite of actions that I outlined earlier. We also took the unprecedented step of putting in place an interim moratorium on new industrial activities on 734,410 hectares of land in the northeast of the province until we can finalize a partnership agreement with the federal government with First Nations in the area to address caribou populations and stability. This is all part of an effort, Honourable Speaker, that includes making sure that we protect this iconic species. It's part of the biodiversity in this province that we enjoy, part of the constitutionally protected rights of Indigenous people to hunt these animals. We're determined that with the measures we are taking, that caribou populations will stabilize and grow. Thank you.
Member for Prince George Vilmont.
So let's call it what it is. Forcing workers to join a union they don't want to is nothing more than blatant discrimination. And it doesn't matter whether it's one project or 10 projects. Qualified workers in British Columbia should get to work on every project in British Columbia. Don Rebello is a proud British Columbian and someone who regularly speaks and works in high schools encouraging women in the trades. She's accomplished and she's highly qualified. Don has a message for the Premier today, and I quote, "For 26 years, I've helped build this province, from working on major mining projects to the Site C Dam. I'm proud of my skills, and I feel insulted and disrespected by the Premier's comments that somehow I'm unqualified to do my job because he thinks the CLAC members like me are turkeys. Why is the Premier discriminating against me?" End quote. Those are the words of this Premier. It is time for him to stand up in this legislature today to look Don Rebello and her colleagues in the eye and explain exactly why she should not be able to work on every project in British Columbia. She's accomplished, qualified. It's time for the Premier to answer that tough question.
Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I really am very pleased that the opposition in their invitation list have had at least 2 women who are working in the trades. It's terrific. I've got to admit that this is something that we are absolutely committed in. We are one of the ways we're working through the Community Benefits Agreement is to invest in women who will be getting to trades and getting a full apprenticeship. $1.8 million was put towards supporting women in the trades on International Women's Day by the Premier. This is something we are absolutely committed to, Mr. Speaker. So I'm really pleased to see that it is actually taking effect. And people can, the community benefit agreements projects are open to anyone, to any skilled trade. We want to ensure that we build up the workforce so that Dawn and Carmen are not on their own. Mr. Speaker, we want to ensure that we are training people for the future, so we don't face the skill shortage that we are facing now, that we deal with the ageing demographic that we have, that we get people trained, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, I know that we've had a couple of women cited, but there are a lot of women who are extremely pleased about our community benefits agreements, including Ashley Duncan, who's an insulator from Coquitlam, who says when you're a construction apprentice, it can be difficult to find a job, and it's even worse for women apprentices. That's one of the reasons we have trouble retaining women in the trades, Mr. Speaker. A community benefits agreement is a game changer. Mr. Speaker, we've changed the game. We're going to make sure that everybody gets an opportunity.
Members. Member for Prince George Valemount on a supplemental.
Thank you very much. Well, finally, an accurate answer from this minister, because guess what? It's a game changer, all right, for the men and women in this gallery today who are not permitted to work on a project in British Columbia unless, and the members think that these workers think that answer is laughable. They can only work on those projects if they abandon the union of their choice and join a select number of unions picked by this Premier. That is blatant discrimination. Now let's be clear. Rob Main is a heavy equipment operator who helped to build the Surrey Hospital redevelopment and expansion. Rob's also here today, and he says, and I quote, "Why has the Premier decided that I'm no longer good enough to work on public projects? I'm proud of the work I've done as a member of the CLAC union for 16 years. What right does he have to call me a turkey and ban me from public projects so he can pay off his friends?" End quote. Rob wants an answer, and he wants it from the Premier. It's time for the Premier to get up and answer to the men and women who live and work in this province and explain to them why they are not qualified enough to work on projects, and in his book, they're nothing more than turkeys.
Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm continued to be surprised by the opposition's lack of understanding of community benefit agreements when even under their watch, even under the 16 years that they were government, Mr. Speaker, that they used project labour agreements. They had the same list of unions, Mr. Speaker, whether it was on the John Hart Dam or the Juanita Dam, they had the same list of unions, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, we are rebuilding our province. We are investing in people. We are investing in Indigenous people, in women, in people who live close to the projects. That's the base of the Community Benefit Agreement, and anyone in British Columbia who wants to get well-trained, get a Red Seal apprentice, wants to commit to British Columbia and to their future, can work on a community benefit agreement.
Member for Parksville, Qualicum.
what this government, what this minister, what this premier are doing are discriminating against these workers that are here who want to work on projects, public projects. Here in the gallery today is 28-year-old heavy equipment operator Brian Stoker. And he says, quote, "I am a proud British Columbian with the skills necessary to help build this province. How is it fair to ban me from working on public projects unless I join an NDP-endorsed union?" End quote. These workers here today deserve answers from this premier. Why are skilled trades workers like Brian having opportunities taken away from them? Why are they being shut out of the work on public projects in British Columbia?
Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to know why the opposition is misleading them, Mr. Speaker.
Members, I'm concerned we're taking away from questions that might be asked, so perhaps we could hear what the minister has to say.
The opposition has spent this question period throwing around misconceptions about community benefits agreements, which the opposition, when they're in government, used themselves. They had 14 unions. But, Mr. Speaker, as we have said, Mr. Speaker, from the very beginning, when we introduced community benefits agreements are based on rebuilding the province, on investing in people in the province, and anyone can work on a community benefits agreement project, Mr. Speaker. And if people in the gallery, I hope that they are appreciating this discussion. It is a healthy debate, but I hope that they can listen through the misconceptions that the opposition have been throwing around today.
Member Abbotsford West.
Well, quite frankly, I'm surprised. I actually thought, Mr. Speaker, confronted by 100-plus British Columbians who genuinely and understandably feel insulted, that the Premier at a minimum, would have stood up and apologized to them for what he said. You know, people like Ed Lane are here, 25 years operating heavy equipment, pays his taxes. He'd like to have the opportunity to work on projects belong to the union of his choice. Belong to the union of his choice. And for that lifetime of hard work, he is insulted and disparaged by the Premier of the province of British Columbia. He's called a turkey. Now, he's got thick skin. He's probably been called worse things by better people.
Yeah, for sure.
But he has never been insulted by the Premier of the province of British Columbia, and at a minimum, the Premier knows our views on these agreements. He knows that we are opposed to the discrimination that they represent for workers across British Columbia. But at a minimum, on a day when these British Columbians are in the gallery, will he stand up and apologize for insulting them so blatantly?
Members, Premier.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. And I appeal to those on the other side to allow me to answer the question since you've asked it to me. I want to first say to those who are in the gallery today, thank you for your service to the people of British Columbia. Thank you for your work in building a better BC. All British Columbians, whether they're a member of the operating engineers, the IBEW, or CLAC, deserve the respect of their government. What we're not hearing today, Honourable Speaker, is the reference to
Members.
Do you want me to answer the question for the people in the gallery?
Members, we shall hear the response.
The reference to turkeys was to Mr. Phil Hochstein, who was appointed, I guess he wasn't busy enough, was appointed by that government to head the turkey marketing board. Political rhetoric, as you've seen today, those in the gallery, political rhetoric is part and parcel of question period. That was where the concept came from. The concept of community benefit agreements is not an NDP idea. It was an idea that was hatched by a guy named W.A.C. Bennett, and it has built British Columbia. Members on that side of the House used project labor agreements throughout their time in government. So to bring people here today so they can participate in the democratic process is a good thing. And we can disagree. We can disagree about policies, particularly in this place. We campaigned, Honourable Speaker, we campaigned, thank you, Member for Penticton, we campaigned on community benefits agreements, and we have in place 3 out of the hundreds and hundreds of projects that we will build with public dollars. And we welcome the members in the gallery to continue to do their fine work to build a better British Columbia. But we can disagree. We can disagree about policy. That's what democracy is about. We on this side of the House, believe we need to build the next generation of workers, and a way to do that is through community benefit agreements. And the members in the gallery will know that those on that side of the House really did not care about what my answer would be. They really did not care. They only want to promote themselves, not the workers of British Columbia. We're proud of what we're doing and continue doing.